Greetings, students. Welcome back to our study of Taoist philosophy. This morning we're going to focus on Chapter 1 of the Tao Te Ching. So let's just read it together first. Tao called Tao is not Tao. Names can name no lasting name. Nameless, the origin of heaven and earth. Naming, the mother of 10,000 things. Empty of desire, perceived mystery. Filled with desire, perceive manifestations. These have the same source, but different names. Call them both deep, deep and again deep, the gateway to all mystery. Words are only fingers pointing at the moon. But without that finger pointing, where would we look? And how would we know where to look? All thought seems to begin and end with words, symbols and images of all types. But does it mean words are what it's all about? Confucian philosophy was characterized by wanting to get words right. Confucius, or Kongzi, always wanted to perform what he called the rectification of names. And like everything else, Confucians wanted to get all their words into proper order. Consider a passage from the Analects of Confucius on this. Says Lu said, "The ruler of Wei has been waiting for you, in order with you to administer the government. What will you consider the first thing to be done?" The master replied, "What is necessary is to rectify names." "So indeed," said Lu, "you are wide of the mark. Why must there be such rectification?" The master said, "How uncultivated you are, you! A superior man, in regard to what he does not know, shows a cautious reserve. If names be not correct, language is not in accordance with the truth of things. If language be not in accordance with the truth of things, affairs cannot be carried on to success. When affairs cannot be carried on to success, proprieties in music do not flourish. When proprieties in music do not flourish, punishments will not be properly awarded. When punishments are not properly awarded, the people do not know how to move hand or foot. Therefore, a superior man considers it necessary that the names he uses may be spoken appropriately, and also that what he speaks may be carried out appropriately. What the superior man requires is just that in his words there may be nothing incorrect. Well, Confucians love to get everything straight and ordered and proper, and this seemed to irritate the Taoists. They seem to wonder if words are what thought is really all about. Maybe there could be a midpoint between where we begin and where we end. And words point us to that. But they don't accurately define it or capture it. A point that can only be experienced, apprehended and remembered and pointed to. But while you're there, words are useless. I mean, even my morning coffee, I can't sum it up in words. Consider how the Tao Te Ching opens. Tao called Tao is not Tao. Or the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. Or the way that can be spoken is not the constant way. Or another translation says the ways that can be walked are not the eternal way. And then continues in the next line, names can name no lasting names. Or we can't define reality. Or, well, people translate it a lot of different ways. And here, just looking at the first line of the Tao Te Ching, we have our first bit of practical metaphysical instruction. The Tao Te Ching begins with words too, but only to point us beyond them. The first lines are a finger pointing at the experience of the finger pointing at the moon. So look at the first line with me. Here's the Chinese characters. Dao ka Dao, Fei Chang Dao. And if you look up the characters in our little glossary in the back of our book, like I've taught you to, Dao has a double sense. It can mean a way, like a way you walk through, a way through a valley, a way down a path, but it can also mean to tell, or a telling. Cuz just can be. Now we have way tell again, Dao. Fei, no, Chang, common, enduring, lasting, and Tao. The way that can be walked, or wait is not the lasting way. The telling that can be told is not the lasting telling. But really maybe you're saying or pointing to both at once. Think of all the different combinations you could have here. Way walked, way walked, telling, way told, way, telling, told, telling, telling, told, way. Telling, walked, telling. All of the different shades of meaning you can play with. Reminds me of Greek. Reminds me of English in a way. Because words are slippery beasts. They slip right out of your hands. They're only ways of pointing, or they're like footprints, or just sort of traces left in the air. I mean, just look at these Chinese characters here. They're really like the footprints of the old boy. They're the footprints of the passage of the old boy through history. The footprints of the radical Taoists, pointing toward an experience they want us to share. Perhaps words and symbols are traces or tracks of thought, as natural as footprints in the dust. But think how bizarre it would be if we thought the footprint was the person, if we thought the hoofprint was the horse. And maybe one proof of real thinking is that tracks are left behind and they really can lead us somewhere. And we can begin to see in the tracks of the thinker's passage the way they have gone, sort of found or pointed to in the shapes and sounds and meanings of the words. And the proof is only found, the sort of ratification of the words, when the words actually take us somewhere too, when the footprints we're following lead us to something real. But the words do not represent reality. The words do not grasp the essence. And if words are only pointers like this, but are taken instead to represent the reality like the Confucians thought, I mean, they thought they could know what a real gentleman was, what a superior man was, and they meant a superior man. You wouldn't translate that as superior human being. They thought they knew what a superior man was. And they knew how everybody ought to be. And everyone had a name. And everything had a place. Right? Names and places. But if we do that, if we think the names can grasp reality in their fullness, we can get ourselves into a strange situation. Because words, Taoists tell us, are the way things appear, and not the way they are. And if we mix up the two, then something alarming can happen, and usually does, in the way human beings interact with the world and each other. There is the way things appear, codified in custom and culture and language, and passed down to us through tradition, which if we accept unthinkingly, drinking it in from our culture like our mother's milk, will lead us to think that words represent reality. But the words are often like a dream, having nothing to do with the realities of those people and things we live in the midst of. Heraclitus, the ancient Greek thinker, sounding very much like a Taoist, remarks that most people fail to notice what they do when they wake up, just as they forget what they do when asleep. Most people seem awake, but are really like dreamers, mistaking the hints of things for the realities, hypnotized by the finger dance of words. Do you really believe you are what everyone has told you you are? That to be you is to be what you have been taught you are? And that others are what their names appear to show? There's a practical example of this I use over and over again in my classes about this entrance into the gap between words and reality when I first began to learn about metaphysics in a practical way. And it happened when I was about 5 years old. Now, I was raised in the Deep South back in the 60s, back in New Orleans, Louisiana. And one day my mama, when I was 5, took me shopping. And we went to a department store, and we saw a sight that looked sort of like this. In the store, I was thirsty. I'm thirsty, Mama. She says, just a minute, Jimmy. Because she called me Jimmy. And we looked at those water fountains, and I looked at them too. And my mother pointed at the water fountain that said colored may use this, and then at the one that said white may use this. And she said to me, "That's stupid, Jimmy. There's no difference between people." And she took me to get a drink from the colored water fountain. Now at this point, a security guard standing by came over and told my mom something like, "Y'all must be from up north. Y'all need to be using that white fountain." And my mom got up in his face. My mom was young. She had me when she was about 17, so she was about 22 then, and she gets lit into that dude, telling him what an asshole he was. And I can remember standing there, little 5-year-old me, looking at the water fountains, looking at my mama, listening to the security guard, listening to him argue, and I fell into the gap. I fell into the gap between the words and the reality, because the reality I was experiencing seemed to let me know these words had nothing to do with the realities of human experience. My mother was teaching me a practical metaphysical lesson, though she wouldn't have thought of it like that, having never even graduated from high school. But she led me into the gap, and she was trying to show me that cultural symbols and words masquerade as realities and only serve to cover that reality up. She would have said, like she did, we're all just human beings. Her PhD-educated son might say, well, I can see now that human beings aren't ontologically dissimilar, but we'd have been pointing at the same thing. And we'd have both been understanding that the words colored and white made up an artificial, yet powerful appearance. Words over and over again are taken for what is real in this way. But names can name no lasting name. Consider chapter 32 with me. Begin to make order, and names arise. Names lead to more names, and to knowing when to stop. Know when to stop. Avoid danger. If you confuse those names with reality, right? If you confuse them with something that tells you the essence or reality of something, you're going to put yourself in danger, and you're going to put others in danger. And it can give rise to a terrible situation. When I was younger, when the old Soviet Union fell apart and the Eastern European countries began to break up, a lot of troubles arose in various of those countries. One of them in ex-Yugoslavia, especially centered around the city of Sarajevo. Right? And there were two groups fighting each other on opposite sides, and it doesn't matter which side, right? But one side was persecuting the other side that was in the city of Sarajevo, and it became like a big international thing because Sarajevo had been a place where the Olympic Games had been held, and so it was an Olympic city. But what had happened is one group had wanted to get rid of the other group, to drive them out of their country, and they invented a word for it that's kind of interesting, that's come down through history. They called it ethnic cleansing. They wanted to get people from the other religion, from the other historical group, the other cultural group, out of their part of the country. What's funny is, though, if you put these two folks side by side, they'd look exactly the same. And in fact, they'd been living beside each other for centuries, but they were divided by their religion and by their culture. Now, actually, I was getting ready to teach this class many years ago when I was watching the evening news. And the TV reporter had gone to the city around Sarajevo and the mountains around Sarajevo, and he was talking to the soldiers there who had artillery guns there they were using to shell the city. And you also had newsmen inside the city, and they were doing one of those reports, right? And in the city, you could see the shells landing, you could see the damage it caused, you could see all kinds of problems. And then they'd shoot back up to the artillery guys and ask them what they were doing. And they would say, well, we're doing ethnic cleansing. We're setting our country free. We're trying to get rid of our enemies. The words these artillerymen used to explain themselves reveal an appearance not interconnected with the reality of what was happening. Ethnic cleansing, as if one were scrubbing something and making it clean and pure. But the reality is something else, because while they were filming, the artillery guys decided to do a time on target. Now, I happen to know what that was because in the Army, I'd learned how to participate in calling in a time on target. It's what happens when you pick out certain prearranged places for shells to land all over the place, and then you fire them all at once so that they all land at the same time, which could be very disorienting for the enemy. All of a sudden, people in all kinds of different places, at a headquarters, at an outpost, at a kitchen, at a barracks, boom, all at once. All these explosions are going off. And they decided to do a time on target on the playgrounds of Sarajevo during recess time. And when the recess bells rang, the children went out on the playground, and all across Sarajevo, boom, the artillery hit all at once. And there were cameramen down in the schoolyards, and they were showing the children who'd been harmed and had been hit. And I remember them. They had one boy who was about 14 they were carrying on a stretcher, and the news guy was walking right by him, and they were filming him. And he had this look in his eyes. He had a look that showed he was in the gap between the experience of reality, right, and what the words said, right? Schoolyard, playground, city, time on target, ethnic cleansing. The eyes of that young boy, I can still remember them because he seemed to understand something, right? He had the eyes of, sadly, an experienced metaphysician who was coming into tune with reality. He understood that names can name no lasting name, and he understood something else. He understood these words: fine weapons are ill-omened tools. They are hated. Therefore, the old Taoist ignores the lieutenant on the left, the general on the right, as in funeral ceremonies. Weapons are ill-omened, not proper instruments. When their use can't be avoided, calm restraint is best. Don't think they are beautiful. Those who think they are beautiful rejoice in killing people. Those who rejoice in killing people cannot achieve their purpose in this world. When many people are killed, we feel sorrow and grief. A great victory is a funeral ceremony. Fine weapons are ill-omened tools, not proper instruments. Now notice we don't have pacifists here. When their use can't be avoided, calm restraint is best. But don't think they're beautiful. Don't think they're beautiful. This makes me think of my instructor in the Army who taught me about the M16 rifle. And I remember he came out and said, you see this thing? It's ugly. It's ugly. It's a tool you use for killing people. And we don't want to kill people unless we have to. And so we're going to learn how to use it well so that we can use it properly if the horrible time comes when we have to use it. And I remember thinking, my God, this old sergeant of mine, he's a Taoist. Though he might not have thought so. Right? Fine weapons are ill-omened tools. And think about this, a great victory is a funeral ceremony. Think if we just won like World War II, and instead of, marching down and throwing a parade and everybody going hoorah, we'd all been a little sad because something horrible had happened. Maybe that would have fit in more with what the soldiers actually experienced. Because even the people who won, if you talked to them, they didn't seem too happy about what they'd gone through or what they'd had to do, even though it was necessary. Because they seemed to understand that a great victory is a funeral ceremony. Look at the next two lines in chapter 1. Nameless, the origin of heaven and earth, but naming, the mother of 10,000 things. Naming. All kinds of things can spring up with the naming. Be careful with your naming. Be careful with those 10,000 things. Always remember that names can name no lasting names, and that those 10,000 things are beyond your words. And when you begin to see this, that what you're told about the world, in the words your parents, teachers, school, church, synagogue, temple, moth, atheist society, whatever, whoever brought you up, that those words don't always mesh with the way things are, and can at best only point to something you need to experience. Then you're beginning to do philosophy like the radical Taoists did, and there's nothing mystical at all about it, really. Just a sort of clear seeing. You move from the customs and words and symbols you've inherited from your culture into self-knowledge, where you begin to experience for yourself what's going on, and you begin to speculate, to think about it, and the words you begin to use or the words you leave behind are just a track or a trace of thought, just footprints in the freaking sand. And they could lead you somewhere, but the footprint is not the person. I mean, whoever the old boy was, Lao Tzu, he left us the tracks and traces of his thought. And we're following along behind him, right? And we can point at him. We can point at these tracks and traces, the tracks and footprints of the words. But you don't want to confuse the tracks and traces, the footprints in the words, with the reality of the thing. You don't want to try to throw that lasso around an ox by lassoing the fingerprint or the hoof print. That'd be pretty funny, wouldn't it? Somebody standing there trying to lasso a hoof print and then ride it off into the sunset. The level-headed people say, why can't these thinkers ever be clear? Just state it clearly. There's no mystery. Words are so simple and clear. Just tell us what you believe. Do you believe in God? Does life have a meaning? Are you one of us? Are you like me? Are you different? Just tell me what you think, people demand. Tell me what you believe. We want to know who you are. Why don't you just tell us? If you do what the words say, right, you'll be safe. Everyone will know who you are, and you'll never get into any trouble. As if the words could do that. As if the words could frame reality. As if words could name a lasting name. But what if you've begun to see that the way which can be named is no real way? And moving out from custom and convention, moving out from being what the Confucians called the superior man, who moves in society like a fish in water, breathing in and out through custom, swimming around in society with the way of the gentleman, leaving that behind, you might seem to others and yourself something like what chapter 20 is talking about. Break with learning, and there will be no trouble. Yeah, yes, sir. Is there a big difference between them? Excellent and despicable. What's the real difference between them? Here the Taoists are taking pot shots at the Confucians. Confucians, just like we do, they thought there's a real difference between yeah and yes, sir. I mean, if I was talking with the president of Eckerd College or even of the United States and he told me to do something, I'd have said, yeah. They'd say, oh, you got to respect your betters, right? There's a big difference between being excellent and despicable. But the old Taoist asks, is there? What others hold in respect, we can't fail to respect. A quote from Confucius. What others hold in respect, we can't fail to respect. Craziness. Aren't we over this yet? All the others are beaming and beaming, like people enjoying a grand ceremonial feast, like people climbing an overlook tower in the spring. In the spring, they'd go out on these towers and have picnics and look out at the spring countryside, and everybody's happy. And he's saying that's the way society is. Everybody knows their place. Everybody's got their name. I'm a professor. You're a student. I'm an American. Those people are Chinese or Indians or whatever. I'm white, and you're colored, right? And everybody knows their place. Everybody's like that. But the old Taoist says, I alone am still. No indications at all yet. Like an infant who hasn't yet even smiled. So sad. Like someone with no place to go home to. When you begin to realize this, you feel like you've lost your home, right? You don't know who to talk to. You don't know who to trust. Your whole society seems like it's stark raving mad. Everybody's going around thinking the names, name last in names, and they understand everything, and you feel like you don't understand a damn thing. It seems like, in fact, that all the others have a superabundance, while I alone seem to have missed out. Oh, my simpleton's mind. I'm so confused. Compared with everybody else, I seem like a simpleton. They think that they know what patriotism means. They think they know what it means to be an American. They think they know who God is. They think that they know when to say yeah and yes, sir, and who to say it to. But oh, my simpleton's mind, I'm so confused. I'm not like those ordinary men who are so bright. I alone am so dull. Ordinary men are so sharp, knowing all those words and what they mean. I alone am so stupid, churned up like the ocean, blown about like somebody with no place to rest. All the others have their function. They know what to do. They believe in the words, and the words tell them what to do. I alone am thick-headed, like someone from the countryside, like someone from the back country. I alone am different from others. I'm treasuring the nourishing mother. To the sage, to the philosopher, the person who's entered the gap, the world becomes more murky, more ambiguous, because the clear distinctions the words fooled you into thinking were real vanish. What society called clarity arose from privileging one of the opposites over another and giving it a name. Words give you the illusion of crystal clear distinctions, like the distinction between yeah and yes, sir, excellent and despicable, and everyone is beaming at the great feast of words. And those who have all the words and believe in them seem so bright, so sharp, and seem to clearly know what their function is. And their words give them a place to rest with their certainty. But the Taoist philosopher is like an infant who has not yet smiled, like a country bumpkin, confused and dull and stupid, with no place to go home to, no place to rest. Lose the names that name a lasting name, and you have no secure place to be, because nothing is, no thing is, and you're not a thing either. You feel like the ocean, blown about, confused with your simpleton's mind, and there's no clarity of yes and no, right and wrong, what I am and what I am not. I've entered the space of the Tao. And in this space, or in this place that's no place, you embrace the opposites, the yes and the no. And you don't think you understand everything just because you have words for them. And you don't think you need an answer because you're suddenly beginning to see that there's no problem, that things are so of themselves, like the Taoism says. The world is made of things that are so of themselves. They just happen, right? They just happen. And you do not seek to control them, but to come into harmony with them. If you remember the lecture on the coincidence of opposites. You don't try to make the opposition disappear. The thing to do is to understand each opposition on its own terms, instead of creating a category to obliterate the seeming paradox. The way in which, for example, quantum physics has been forced to acknowledge that light is both a wave and a particle. In this context, fundamentally a wave. In this other one, fundamentally a particle. What a nice metaphor. And you can't find just one category to contain and control the light. So viewing the world as full of opposites that can't be collapsed into a single account that's utterly self-consistent means the reality of the world is a paradoxical thing from the point of view of the literal-minded person who thinks the names explain everything. And then when the names begin to slip and slide and break and creak, they get confused and run away from it. And I ask you, doesn't reality seem paradoxical to you? Haven't you always sensed that no single story, doctrine, or way of life fully captures life? The reality is both this way and that way. Don't all answers that say they answer every question ultimately dissatisfy you? Don't you sense in your heart that no single story or theory can capture all of this. Look around you wherever you are. What can capture the experience you're having right now? This strange and wonderful and terrifying experience we point at with the word life. Listen to a quote from the great Alan Watts talking about this. We don't know what it is we're aware of, especially when we take it all together. And there's this sense of going on. I can't even really say this, although I said something going on. But that is an idea, a form of words. Obviously, I couldn't say something is going on unless I could say something else isn't going on. I know motion by contrast with rest, and while I'm aware of motion, I'm also aware of being at rest. So maybe what's at rest isn't going, and what's in motion is going, but I won't use that concept then, because in order for it to make sense, I have to include both. I have to have the opposites. If I say here it is, that excludes what isn't, like space. If I say this, it excludes that, and I am reduced to silence. But you can feel what I'm talking about. That is what's called Tao. That's where we begin. I mean, how can you sum up a human being? I can't even sum up a flower, let alone a human being or the whole universe. Doesn't it seem to you that the world is incredibly beautiful and incredibly ugly? That it's made up all of wonder and of all of terror? And that people are good and bad, and sometimes it seems like at the same time, and you don't know how to fit it all together? And that you cannot unify the opposites into a single story, no matter how hard you try? That the instant you think you have the cause, the explanation, the opposite of it is born. As it says in chapter 2, recognize beauty and ugliness is born. Recognize good and evil is born. Is and isn't produce each other. Hard depends on easy. Long is tested by short. High is determined by low. Sound is harmonized by voice. After is followed by before. And you do not seek an extreme. You do not seek to take one of the opposites and favor it over the other. Instead, you seek the balance, the harmony of the opposites, as in number 77. Heaven's Tao is a stretched bough, pulling down on the top, pulling up on the bottom. If it's too much, cut. If it's not enough, add on to it. Heaven's Tao. The human route is not like this, depriving the poor, offering to the rich. Who has a surplus and still offers it to the world? Only those with Tao. Therefore the sage acts and expects nothing, accomplishes and does not linger, has no desire to seem worthy. You take the opposites and you use them like the bow. You pull down on the top, you pull up on the bottom, and you get that proper tension between the opposites, and you can make the arrow fly. And when faced with extreme force, you paradoxically do not counter with force, because that's just not how the world is. Instead, you realize what number 77 says. Nothing in the world is soft and weak as water, but when attacking the hard and strong, nothing can conquer so easily. Weak overcomes strong. Everyone knows this. No one attains it. Therefore the sage says, accept a country's filth and become master of its sacred soil. Accept country's ill fortune and become king under heaven. True words resemble their opposites. So to follow the Tao is to try to maintain that balanced opposition, to try to ride the tiger of the opposites. You want to know the male, maintain the female, and become the channel of the world, and Da will endure. You want to return to infancy, know the white, sustain the black, become the pattern of the world, and Da, integrity, will not falter. Return to the uncarved block. Know honor, sustain disgrace, become the valley of the world, and Da will prevail, and integrity will prevail. Don't try to carve up the world into things you can use with names on them. Don't think that because you put names on them, you can control them. Remember the simplicity of the yes and the no together, which goes with each other, and can only be separated in the mad theories of a mad culture that does not understand what chapter 29 is saying. Trying to control the world? I see you won't succeed. The world is a spiritual vessel and cannot be controlled. Those who control fail. Those who grasp lose. You grab it, you're like a fish slipping right out of your hands. You won't be able to hold on to it. But if your hand's off, if you let it be, maybe it can nourish you. Maybe you can dance with it. Maybe you can walk with it. Maybe you can walk through the world and have balance. So thank you for listening to me. I look forward to seeing you in our Zoom class where we can talk some more about this. Thank you for your kind attention.